I want to show you a similar process for Amrad. We're going to use the same basement from the previous slide as a starting point, but this time for the Amrad installation. Same as Ampex, you can either start with a half panel or a full one. The panels have the same interlock system along the edge as Ampex. Keep installing the panels until you reach the end. Normally you would need to trim the last panel, but again, through the power of 3D modeling, we don't need to trim the panel here. Since we started with a full panel for our first row, our second row would need to start with a half panel. Use a utility knife or a fine-tooth handsaw to cut the panel. Keep laying the panels down until you reach a column or a wall. Cut the panel to fit around the column. You do not need to be as precise here as you would want to be with Ampex, since we would need to use a more robust sealing technique here. Once the panel has been trimmed and placed, cut the small piece to fit inside the opening. You do need to use any sealant or adhesive to secure it in place unless you have a bigger gap between the panel and the column. Keep installing the panels until you reach the end. Trim the last panel as needed to fit. Finish installing all the remaining row following the same pattern. Now we need to install the adapter for the exhaust system. The location needs to be far enough to clear the footer, but not too far from the wall itself. We recommend to install the adapter at the intersection of the intended lines like we're showing in the render for best airflow. But technically anywhere along the lines would be acceptable. Do not install the adapter along the edges of the panel. Depending on the size of your slab, you might need to have two exhaust systems. You can use a utility knife and a handsaw or a drill with a hole saw to cut the foam out. Use polystyrene foam compatible sealant to install the adapter. Apply a single bead on the underside of the adapter, flip it, and place it down. What you see on the left and what it looks like underneath on the right, you can see how installing it when the lines intersect gives the adapter the most access for best airflow. Cut a section of pipe to approximately 12 inches long. Make sure the bottom is clean by removing any burrs from the inside and outside of the pipe. Use cement to connect the 4-inch pipe to the adapter and hold it there for a minimum of 30 seconds. The connection method is done using standard plumbing practices and material. Take some of your vapor barrier tape, cut it into small sections, and apply along the edges of the adapter, creating roughly the same square or octagon shape. You could also take a section of the peel and stick membrane and just cut a round hole in it instead of the sealant and tape. Take the sealant and apply a single bead between the pipe and the adapter. It is important to cap the pipe and mark it with radon information as required by the building code. These functions as rough-in for the rest of the radon gas exhaust system. The cap will be removed later when the rest of the system will be installed. Use the air and vapor barrier tape over all the seams. For protruding elements such as columns, use a bead of sealant and tape to seal it, or you can cut the peel and stick membrane into smaller sections and use that instead. Use Amvic's pre-cut below-grade peel and stick membrane along the perimeter. Membrane should overlap at least 3 inches over the panels and the wall itself. If some protruding items cannot be sealed with the tape, use smaller sections of this membrane to seal around them. We would recommend using a smaller section of membrane as they are easier to work with when installing. Also, for user installation, we recommend to notch the release paper on the back with a utility knife. This allows to install a membrane on one side, then remove the release paper on the second side. It makes it a lot easier to install it this way. In a situation where product is not available, using a 6mm poly sealant with acoustic sealant to the wall and panels would also be acceptable. This is also part of the building code. Once everything is sealed, concrete is poured and allowed to cure. You can see that the rough-in for the venting system is sticking up from the concrete and is not too far from the wall, as we had indicated in the previous slide. As I mentioned before, the Amrad panels are only part of the solution for radon mitigation. The rough-in is connected to an active, continually running exhaust fan that draws the air from the channels and vents it out, which is what you're seeing in the render.